some of the most successful businesses in our region are family businesses, but running a family business brings its own set of challenges, rules and regulations, and that's what we're going to be talking about over the next half an hour. We have two members of the team here from Evelyn Partners, Laura Hayward and Tom Cadwallader, and a man who knows a thing or two about a family business into a second generation indeed, Jason Woorer. Welcome. Jason, let me start with you. Just tell us a little bit about your involvement in the family business world.
Sure. My family were the family that established East End Foods in Wolverhampton back in the 60s. That business grew into one of the most respected Asian food, ethnic food producers in Europe. We also had a very successful wholesale distribution business based in Smethwick and Aston, and sold up in 2019. The family wanted to retire, the older generation, and I then bought back from the private equity purchaser the wholesale division. So that is now branded Lioncroft Wholesale, and we've been going about 4 years now, so very, very successfully.
So you're covering quite a few bases for us here, aren't you, in terms of succession planning, exit strategies, growth strategies?
Yeah.
Was running a family business always the intention, or did it? Cause some families sort of fall into that sort of business, don't they, in the early days?
Well, it was my father and his 4 brothers that set up East End Foods. So by the end of it, when we sold, there was 3 generations in the business. Quite considerably different to when we started out. I think, you could say we fell into it. It developed beyond our wildest dreams, really, and as a result, the 3 generations were in the family business, and that creates its own challenges around succession planning and general kind of governance of the business and so on. And then obviously, when I've bought back the wholesale business, I have got my wife, my brother, and mum and dad. So it's now my immediate family that are involved in Lioncroft.
Does it force you all to get on and like each other even more than you maybe always do when you're in a family business?
I think we like each other. That's all right.
Tom, tell me a bit about your role here then and your particular specialisms.
So I'm a chartered wealth manager and an investment manager. So it's my job, after the business has grown and made its money, it's thinking about how to start to efficiently withdraw some of that money from the business for the owners and the shareholders, but also how to start to diversify away from a very specific risk of having all of a family's wealth in one business, to maybe think about other ways of investing and how to not only protect that wealth, but try and grow it in the future as well.
And are there particular differences in the way you maybe have to approach a family business versus a non-family business in terms of their attitudes when they first start talking to you then? Or?
Absolutely, and every family business is different, all run with its own unwritten rules that you have to get to learn. But there are key principles that are true throughout most of the businesses that we speak to, and that is, we want to look after the wealth that we've worked so hard to create, and therefore that means not necessarily taking a huge amount of investment risk with the wealth, but at the same time work so hard to potentially build generational wealth. How do we start to move the money through the generations as efficiently as possible?
And Laura, you're head of family business, so this is your world, isn't it? Absolutely your world.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a private client tax partner, and so I work with family businesses to make sure that they are as tax efficient as possible. But along the way, that involves dealing with things like succession, making sure that the business moves successfully to the next generation, but also planning for things such as an exit where there isn't a succession plan in place. So working towards a trade sale, a private equity sale, those sorts of things.
How easy is it? You mentioned trying to make sure you can move a family business onto the next generation or the next phase, given what Tom was saying there about how every family business will have its own particular histories, quirks. How do you, I mean, getting your head around all of that fairly quickly, I imagine, is one of the big challenges.
Yeah, it can be really complex, and of course you've always got this crossover between business and family and the emotions that come into that. So it can be really complex, and one of the first things we do is try and unpick what everybody's objectives are. And then I think it's really important to also make sure that you address things like skill gaps. So making sure you've got the right people in the right roles and that they are skilled enough to do those roles and that they haven't been just, you know, let loose with a role that's beyond their capabilities. And then it's thinking about the future of the business. So have we thought about governance pieces such as dividend policy? How do we want to keep key members of the family that work in the business incentivised? And how do we want to treat non-working shareholders to make sure that everybody feels like they're being treated fairly? That's a really important part of making sure that the succession plan is in place.
So Jason, how do you keep all the members of the family incentivised and motivated?
I think you've got to accept that there will be varying levels of capability across the family, and also the balance that needs to be struck between professional management and family ownership. So making it very clear what the line is, and you know what matters sit in the family part and what sit with the management part. The other thing that is really, really important is the training and the work experience outside of the business, perhaps. And that's more pertinent when you start to get to maybe the third generation, because in our family, certainly, the first generation and the second generation had a big part to play in the initial growth setup of the business. And then as the third generation get in, they're required to bring a different set of skills to contribute to the business. And they would be probably more pointing towards a corporate structure than what was the original family business.
Then there's an emotive element to that as well, isn't there, in terms of not wanting to unpick what the previous generations have so successfully built up, isn't there, because it's family members?
And I think a really good way of doing that is by sitting together and really thinking about what your company's values are. And if you can all get on the same page with what your values are across the generations, then that really helps to focus discussions for how the business will look for the future generation.
Because succession, as an example, you can't always count on that, can you? You know, and that's going to be something that can be completely out of your hands. So what's the alternative, and how do you plan for that, and how do you decide which way you might want to go?
Well, one of the ways that many families adopt is a family constitution. So that, much to your point, Laura, that the values, the actual basis, the pillars of the family, and what made that business is really, really important to acknowledge and codify. And then what would be the remit and what would be the kind of boundaries of if a new family member, third gen, fourth gen, comes in, what are the prerequisite skills required? And that often works. People who have done it really, really well, they've run, I mean, the Beretta family, for example, in Italy, have got, I think, 15 or 16 generations they've been running their business. But the dynamics change quite a lot.
That will have been reinvented lots of times, won't it, over the course of those? I mean, Tom, from your point of view, what other things are you encouraging family businesses to consider? There's issues like companies' investments and trusts and the structure behind the scenes for a business. Because how many different options, how many different models are there?
So many. And what we tend to find ourselves talking about more often than not, though, is pensions. And as a business owner and operator, you have the ability to utilise pensions in a way that most of us who are just employees don't. You can put a significant amount more into pensions each year, which transfers wealth from the company, which has its own tax benefits for the company, but is also very tax efficient for the individuals as well, because it's a tax-free investment pot to grow potentially for decades and decades. And then it's there ready for you to draw upon in retirement. Now, there'll be some tax to pay at that point, but hopefully the investments have done so well in the meantime. It's also, under current legislation, I must stress, an inheritance tax-free pot of money. So if the business has done incredibly well and there is a significant amount of wealth to pass to the next generation, well, a pension is a great way of, yes, it's outside of the business in personal names, but it's a great way of passing money through the family.
And Laura, from your point of view, what kind of other sort of the issue with assets as
Yeah.
well, and you know where does the personal and the business line?
Yeah,
cross and all of
absolutely.
that sort of-
So, family businesses, successful family businesses often build up lots of other assets, whether that's property investments, cash, other investments in stocks and shares and what have you. And so it's about structuring that asset ownership across the family. And we can do that by using things such as trusts and family investment companies. And those in themselves have some tax advantages if they're structured correctly. But as well as that, using trusts and family investment companies also gives us the opportunity to exercise some control and protection over those assets. For example, who's allowed to benefit from them, what happens in the incident of a bad marriage or a divorce, and how those assets pass. So the structuring is really important, not only from a tax perspective, but also from a family perspective as well.
You can see, Jason, you nodding a lot of that. You've obviously gone through this process
Yeah, a fair bit
many
of it.
times.
But what is also important, so that the tax planning and the succession planning, or the planning of your wealth is super important, because it takes so long to build that base in life. What's also important is the dynamic of the individuals that are coming into the business, and them understanding that they're custodian of their family's hard work and graft over the past X years or X generations. So it's very important that the value sets are kept very strong, the boundaries are kept very strong, and people are clear that they can make a good living and good earning out of the business, but also have to contribute to its success.
What's the biggest challenge of running a family business, do you think, from your point of view?
I think that probably the biggest challenge is keeping that eye on the future, looking at the horizons, and keeping everyone aligned as to what the future looks like, and what they have to do to contribute to that success going forward. So that's probably the most. So it's a more emotional dynamic than simply finance, but that is a super important part of running a successful family business.
And I was going to ask Tom and Laura this actually, in terms of when you're advising companies, how far ahead are you looking into the future? How far are you encouraging them to look?
Oh goodness, that's a really broad question. So ultimately, when we're working with family businesses, we like people to be looking forward to the next generation. That's really important, and it really helps focus the direction of the business in the right way. And it stops a family business from becoming stagnant, from just not really thinking about the future objectives of the business and where the business is going. So looking towards the next generation is really important. But also thinking about the right here, right now. So there may not be a succession plan in place. There may not be a feasible succession in place for the family, because the children want to go off and do different things. They have their own aspirations that don't align with yours. And so sometimes it's really important to acknowledge that and think about an alternative. And that might look like an MBO, for example, if you've got a really key management team in place. And so facilitating that MBO can be an option. And also going out to market and looking for a private equity deal or a trade sale. That's also an option.
And sorry, I'd just say, on the here and now as well, one of the most important things that any business has is the people who are running the business there and then, and having protections in place to ensure that if anything were to happen to those individuals, that there might be an insurance policy in place that could pay out, or that there is a plan in place for what would happen in those sad circumstances, is really important as well.
I was talking to a company a couple of months ago, run by two brothers, and they had set this up on the basis of 50-50 shareholdings, on the basis that they thought their siblings, they'll never have a fallout, it'll all be fine. And then they had a massive fallout, but because they were equal shareholders, they then said that their financial advisor said, if I'd been advising you at the start, I'd have said, one of you have 51, one of you have 49% here. Things like that part of the debate as well.
Yeah.
Who wants to go first on that one?
Well, absolutely. So your articles of association of the business govern who has the voting rights, who has what say over the business, and absolutely that's something that should be taken into consideration about who holds what shares with what rights, and that can look like voting rights, dividend rights, and ultimately rights to capital. And so once you really understand what a family business looks like, what their objectives are, what the dynamics are between the family members, the shareholders and the management team, because you're right, there are 3 different circles there, all of which overlap to some extent. Once you've got a real understanding, then the shareholdings of the business can be structured such that the right people have the right powers.
But conversations like that, Jason, can be quite sensitive and quite difficult, can't they, sometimes?
Well, I think getting alignment between the various members of the family can be difficult to start with, and then you've got the whole process of going through what it could look like should the worst happen. And the more balance you can get up front, the better. You know.
Okay, so go on. Sorry.
I was going to say that. So some of the circumstances that I've come across are we hold workshops for family members, and sometimes there can be up to 40 people in the room, and then it's a really good idea to do one-to-ones with some of those really important stakeholders. And sometimes there isn't a solution to make everybody a happy family and move the business forwards. So then it can look like a demerger. So, for example, I had a property business and there were about 40 different shareholders, but with 2 sides of the family. And this side of the family really wanted to do property development and really grow the business through property development. And this side of the family wanted to buy and hold property assets. And actually, we couldn't get those 2 sides of the family to align. So the best thing to do in that scenario was to demerge the businesses. And we did that really tax efficiently, but enabled both of the sides of the family to go on their journeys. So keeping things flexible is also really important.
Yeah, which gets back to the point you were saying earlier about how there is no real one-size-fits-all in terms
Exactly.
of the way a family business has come to be in the position it's in when it talks to you. So, Tom, let's assume that family business has decided for whatever reason, right, they want an exit. When's the right time to sell, and how do you go about making sure you get the best outcome really for it?
So the best outcome is very different for everyone. The best outcome is actually the outcome that allows you to go and live the life that you want to lead in the future. And so that means that most people have some number in mind of what they think they need to sell their business for in order to go and live their life. And we do lots of cash flow analysis and modelling that says, well, if you have X number of pounds today and then invest in a sensible way over the course of many years and perhaps start to take an income from those investments, that is an income that will allow you to lead the life you want to live, typically we find that that number is far, far lower than most people assume it has to be. And so the best outcome is actually the one that just gets you that number, not necessarily the number you were originally thinking of. Because at the end of the day, we're all here to lead a nice life and go and enjoy the world. And so that's, in my mind, and from what I've seen, always the best outcome.
And actually, Jason, work-life balance is a real issue, isn't it? Because when it's a family business, technically you're always at work, aren't you? Because you're always your head's always in the business to a certain degree.
There's no slowing down, and that is some people thrive off that. You know, I personally I enjoy that quite a lot, but other people do like that kind of leisure time and so on. So it depends on the individual, really, I suppose.
What kind of traits do you think you have to have personality-wise to do, the kind of business, run the kind of business you're running and be in this world?
I don't think they're necessarily any different in a family scenario. I think that just leadership skills, if you're leading teams of people, I mean, we've got 210 now in our organisation, and it's about inspiring people to join you on your journey and giving them the vision and giving them the foresight as to what the company could look like in 5, 10, 15 years' time. And what part they play within that and what benefit they will get as an individual. So, and that's, I suppose, building your team and building a mix of professional management versus is the wrong word, but professional and family management is really, really, really important to build a successful business.
And where do you hope you'd be in 5, 10 years' time? You don't strike me as the kind of person that's looking to put your feet up and put your slippers on and
hopefully not.
take it easy just yet.
I would say something that's in the region of over fivefold where we are today. So, the business has done very well in the last 3 years since the exit from East End Foods and the establishment of Lioncroft Wholesale. We've grown by about 40% organically for now. And we have got many different projects on the burner that are enabling us to grow the business at pace going forward. So, fivefold from where we are today, I suppose.
Excellent. And I want to talk to the two of you then really about how you set the groundwork to encourage longevity in a family business. Because I certainly think since COVID, people are keener than they maybe were to support local, to recognise heritage, to maybe look at the sort of local independence versus the big national internationals. Has the kind of advice that maybe you would be giving to family businesses changed in the last couple of years since COVID at all?
No, I don't think it has really. I think the aspect of the advice that possibly might have changed a little bit is around the flexibility. And so family businesses historically would have just been seen in a very linear way. Well, it will just go on through next generation after generation. And actually now the path can look slightly different to that and needs to be kept flexible to do the right thing for the business and the family. But essentially, family businesses have remained the same for hundreds of years, and that is finding a balance between the business objectives and the personal objectives and all of the personalities involved.
Tom, anything you'd add to that?
I'd just say that not necessarily COVID, but COVID-induced is this period of inflation that we've been going through, and I've found that businesses in general have become just a little bit more cautious and maybe holding a little bit more cash on the balance sheet than they previously were. And that does have a knock-on effect to people's thoughts on their investments and also maybe the investments that the business is holding. Perhaps not as gung-ho in going out and making big capital allocation decisions as they previously were. Just whilst this period of inflation and property prices, most businesses own a property of some sort, maybe not growing that area as quickly, just to see what happens in the world, the economy, and also in the UK with politics.
That's another discussion for another day, what's going to happen with politics over the next 12 months, isn't it, really? I mean, how much are you sort of keeping that on your radar, that kind of thing, Jason?
Well, I think prudent business practice has always been the same. COVID has in a way, allowed us or made us think about what worst case scenario could look like, because no one could ever have imagined that would have happened. Keeping cash on the balance sheet is important, because cash is king, and in times of economic stress, as we're kind of entering at the moment, there are deals to be done. There are opportunities out there that an entrepreneur would take if they've got the cash ready, which then turn the fortunes of the business in the longer run. So I don't know that anything's really changed in terms of financial planning, but it has made us assess what is prudent and what's not prudent.
Yeah, and maybe make people realise that there's more than one way to do things. There are some people who thought before COVID, right, if you want to get from A to B, that's the only road you can take. And my impression is a lot of people don't really think like that anymore.
Well, bear in mind, we've come from an era of free money, basically, and that is changing rapidly. So that also will slow things down a little bit.
Does badging yourself as a family business, in your point of view, give you, is that a sort of competitive advantage? Is it something which creates a different emotive connection to your customers? It's a bit like, when you say made in Britain, people want to support UK manufacturer. Saying a family business, does that have the same effect?
Well, I think it indicates a set of values that are consistent throughout the time that you've been established, which has a value. But ultimately, commercial environment is a commercial environment, and you have to do well by your customers to have a successful business. So yes, the values and the family badge, just as you say, brand Britain has a value. The family business piece has a value as well, but that's not the only thing in the equation.
What about brand Birmingham? Good place to be? Do you think?
I love Birmingham.
Yeah.
I'm known as Mr. Birmingham.
Absolutely,
by the way.
yeah. I know you're sort of obliged, aren't you, to fly the flag for Birmingham? I mean, what's the general feel out there from your point of view? Because you obviously exposed to a lot of different businesses, aren't you?
Well, I mean, you look at the skyline today compared to when I was a kid. It's a very, very different place to be it culturally, be it from a food perspective and opportunities perspective. We've always been an entrepreneurial city, a city of 1,000 trades and so on. So long may that continue. I think there's lots of opportunity in the city and the region currently, and bit by bit that's coming to fruition.
Which is good to hear. Let me ask you one final question, and I'll ask this to all three of you. If there's a family watching this thinking, I want to start my family business, I don't know how to have the wherewithal, I'm unsure of where to go for advice, what are your top tips for families looking to start on the road with business? Things to do, and maybe more importantly, things not to do. Who fancies that?
I'll start. So I would go back to something that we've talked about several occasions across this chat, which is let's start with the values. So let's start with the values, and that will start forming the structure of the business. Think about what's really important in terms of the objectives for the family and the business. That would be my top tip.
Tom?
Mine's simple. Start a pension as soon as you can.
That's not just for family businesses, is it? That's a wise piece of financial advice. What about you, Jess? I mean, maybe before I ask you for your advice, perhaps I couch the question slightly differently from your point of view. Knowing what you know now, is there anything you would have done differently back in those early days?
I think the value sets are very, very important, but actually promoting those and publicising them to a great degree. In our business, funnily enough, we didn't have a formal set of values, but our family had values, and the whole business operated to those values. In the Lioncroft business, I sat down and I made my values and noted them down, and they are honesty, opportunity, purpose, and energy, and you see that spells hope. So what I want out of business is every individual that comes to work for us, they do better for their family, they do better for themselves, and as a result, that energy becomes what raises the business up. So I think the values are really, really important. But actually, in the commercially competitive scenario that we're in globally, we must keep an eye on how well we do business, how efficiently we do business, and be better than the competition, obviously, to succeed. So there's the emotional or the softer part, which is the values of the business that underpin the business, but actually that commercial savviness is what drives it forward.
It's interesting what you said there about you had values, but I imagine in those early days they weren't ever written down in a mission statement. You just had them in your head, and you believed them, the members of the family believed them, because that's how they'd been brought up. Is that what you were talking about earlier about having to understand the unwritten rules and regulations?
Exactly, and it's I think that's a really useful process that you went through, because as the company grows, and you said you've now got 210, you knowing those values and your close family understanding those values, you actually want the whole of the 210 people to have those values too, and that's what's key to growth and success.
So go on then, Jason, if there's one top tip you've got for a family that's thinking, right, we want to do what you've done.
Go for it.
Absolutely perfect, and no doubt you guys, your doors are open to speak to about anything that families might have on their mind that they want to be pointed in the right direction.
Of course, yeah, we'd love to speak to anyone who runs a family business and needs some help.
Great. Jason, Laura, Tom, thank you so much. You got the sunshine seat this afternoon as well, didn't you? Thank you very much indeed for that. It's now time for the Joel Blake Business Show, and in this edition we've got something very special, the launch of something that we teased at the start of the show, and Joel's going to tell you all about it